So today in this video we're going to talk about narcissistic traits, or can we call them general male behavior, right? We're going to really talk about men operating from a wounded masculinity. So that's the title of this video. When we hear the word narcissist, or we hear narcissistic traits, we often think of a mental disorder used by professionals to describe manipulation, lack of empathy, entitlement, and selfishness, right? But I was thinking, what if these behaviors we label as narcissistic tendencies are just normal male behaviors, right? I think we need to focus less on labels and truly see what is in front of us. These behaviors we call narcissistic traits or narcissistic tendencies seems to me as just normal male behavior that we see every day, especially in romantic relationships, right? So today in this video, I'm going to explore with you the idea that narcissistic traits could just be most male behavior, right? And it's just mainly a result of men operating from a wounded masculinity. So we're going to look at these behaviors, how these behaviors affect women in romantic relationship, and also at the end, I'm going to talk about how to preserve yourself as a woman while dating and being in a relationship with men. So I'm gonna do this video in two parts. So in the first part, right now, I'm gonna talk about how narcissists are formed, and then we're gonna talk about narcissistic traits in males. And then in part 2, I'm going to talk about narcissistic traits in males in a romantic relationship, how it looks, and then I'm going to give you how being with a narcissistic man can affect you, and then give you some ways how to deal with narcissistic traits in men. So how narcissists are formed? Well, from my research, what I read and what I see, narcissists are formed from when they are overvalued as a child. That's one. The second one is if they were emotionally neglected as a child. And then the other one is if they had inconsistent parents. And also, you could become narcissistic just by having childhood trauma. And then it also seems like it could be in the genetics. And if you have conditional love as a child, and if your parents were narcissists, you could develop narcissistic traits. And the culture and the environment, all of these could create a narcissist. And that's 8 ways, right? So the way I came up with this video is that I was thinking men who grew up where their parents were excessively involved in their life and give them excessive traits, they turn out to have narcissistic tendencies. And also men who were neglected and had a rough upbringing, they were emotionally neglected, also turn out to have narcissistic traits. So I saw that and I was like, that's really strange to have such opposite childhood and still come out the same. So that is how I come up with this video, where I'm seeing a lot of men have the same narcissistic traits, which I believe is just like a general, normal, basic male behavior, right? So before I get into the video, obviously I want to tell you how narcissistic people are formed. And the first one is if you were overvalued, like as a child. So you had helicopter parents. So your parents were overly involved in your life. They created this unrealistic and inflated sense of importance, like, to you. So they will shield you from failure, and they will like treat you superior than others, and this would cause a child to develop this inflated unrealistic sense of importance, you know. So it's like when your child grows up, they think in adulthood, they think that everybody else should treat them like they're flawless, you know. Most of the time, these children who were overvalued in their family by their parents, they got a lot of material needs met. They were spoiled with things. They got to experience a lot of things, but their emotional world remained impoverished, right? And their emotions, obviously, it was not nurtured. And then they learn how to, as they grow up, they learn how to put admiration as more important than working on character. So that's the first way, right? The second way narcissistic are formed, narcissist personality disorder people are formed, is emotionally neglect, right? So emotionally neglected as a child, not having your emotions met constantly, you know, learning to focus on protecting yourself than actually having a healthy relationship with your parents. Your parents probably constantly criticize you, so you grow up feeling like you're not enough. And to survive all of this unloved and worthless feelings, the child will try to, you know, construct, or as they get older, they construct this false self and project this extreme confidence to mask the seated insecurity and shame they're feeling within themselves. So that's the second way narcissists are formed, right? The other way is conditional love, right? When a child realizes love and attention are only given when they perform perfectly or if they achieve certain goals. So they learn to equate validation with external success, and they heavily suppress who they really are. So that's another way. The fourth way is genetics, you know, inherited personality traits, also combined with differences in brain structure. So, such as a reduced gray matter in areas tied to empathy. This can create a predisposition for developing narcissistic disorder, right? So some people, they just, when they're young, they might be more sensitive, more dominant, or they could be more attention seeking, or they could be more reactive, and that could lead them to be like, have a vulnerability into becoming a narcissist, right? And inconsistent parenting also, being idealized one moment and devalued the next moment, that creates an unstable sense of worth. And then just having childhood trauma, whether it's physical, emotional, or psychological, can create a narcissistic defenses, you know. If your parents were narcissists, you know, family modeling, growing up around narcissistic parents, you learn to be manipulative, you learn to be entitled, and you learn like self-centered behavior. You learn that that's normal, right? And that could make you become a narcissist in the adulthood. And finally, is with the culture, most culture and the environment strongly reward men for status, for image, for appearance, how they look, for if they're in power, you know, if they're admired, and not really focused on empathy and character development. And this can reinforce, and it does reinforce narcissistic traits, right? So that's how narcissists are formed, right? At its core, narcissism is often understood as a way of protecting a fragile self-esteem. So the person may appear confident, may appear superior or entitled on the outside, but underneath they may be like, they have insecurity, they have shame, they fear rejection, and they have this constant need for validation. So as they say, someone could have narcissistic traits without having the mental health condition, right? So that's just how it's formed, right? So now I'm going to just list off narcissistic traits in men, and you're gonna tell me if this doesn't sound like normal everyday male behavior, right? So extreme sense of self-importance, deep-seated need for admiration and attention from others, profound lack of empathy. Most men lack empathy. Aggressive behavior. Most men are aggressive. Hostile. Angry. Get angry easily. Inflated sense of entitlement. Tendency to manipulate and deceive others for personal and financial gain. Right? Grandiose sense of self-importance. Always seeking power. Constant desire for control. These, when I hear these traits, narcissistic traits or tendencies, this just sound like most men. Gaslighting, shifting the blame, emotional unavailability, exploitive behavior, sensitive to criticism, can't take criticism well, chronic envy, arrogance, boasting about or exaggerating their accomplishments. You always hear men be boasting about what they accomplish, having this inflated self-esteem, constantly needed attention and validation. These are narcissistic traits in males. Always want to talk about themselves and redirecting the conversation to another topic. You see this all the time. These are called narcissistic traits. To me, what I'm saying in this video, these just sound like normal, everyday, regular male behaviors, right? Believing they are entitled to special treatment. And not only just in romantic relationship, just in society, assuming that everyone is envious of their success, assuming that everyone is envious of their attractiveness and their personality, showing little to no interest in anyone's needs or achievement, insulting and being condescending to others. Rapid mood swing, such as short temper, displaying sudden anger and hostility, becoming verbally and physically aggressive when challenged, when criticized or humiliated, right? And an impaired ability to show empathy, which I have to repeat again. Impaired ability to show empathy or concern for others' needs or their emotional difficulty or their well-being. So what I'm saying in this video is that these are called narcissistic traits of males, and to me it just sounds like normal, regular male behavior you see every day, whether or not it's in a romantic relationship. And this is when you read these traits and when you look at most men today, especially in romantic relationships, it's like normal, right? It's becoming common now to see these traits. And it's basically just, you could sum it up and say, in my opinion, that it's an arrested emotional development, right? Most men, they grow up physically, but they're not mature. They didn't mature emotionally. They struggle with self-awareness. They struggle with emotional regulation. That's why they get angry fast. They're hostile. They lash out, right? They lack self-awareness. They lack accountability. They don't have healthy communication skills. So instead of walking through their emotions, they suppress them and they blame others and they be impulsive. This is the problem here. And I think like calling these things narcissistic traits and narcissistic tendencies is just trying to justify this behavior. These are, to me, in my opinion, this is normal male behaviors we see in men every day, and I think calling them narcissistic traits is like, you know, making an excuse for them or trying to justify their behavior. It should be just seen as men operating from their wounded masculinity, and this refers to a man whose sense of manhood has been damaged by insecurity, you know, in his childhood. Shame, rejection, trauma in his childhood, humiliation, and feeling inadequacy growing up, right? And instead of feeling secure in who he is constantly trying to prove himself, protect himself, and validate his masculinity, obviously because most men don't work on themselves. And that is why you see men are always trying to dominate and feel powerful, right? They're masking their insecurity, they're masking their shame, right? That is why they have difficulty admitting their mistakes. They don't want to look like they make a mistake. They don't want to look vulnerable. They don't want to look like they have flaws, right? So that's why they're so controlling behavior. That's why you see the emotional unavailability. They're fearful. That's why you see aggression and anger. Anger is the one of the easiest emotion you could feel and display. That's why they're so arrogant and use bravado to cover their insecurity. You know, it's, instead of what I'm saying in this video, instead of calling it narcissistic traits, it's just simply a lack of inner growth. You know, it's having an arrested emotional development. You didn't develop yourself from a child. Like, when you become an adolescent, you have to take responsibility for evolving and growing and being better. And that is what these men have not done. And now we're calling it narcissistic tendencies, when it's just an unevolved mindset, when it's just a limited mindset, when it's just that you're emotionally stunted, you know. It's just, men are just disconnected from themselves, disconnected from emotions, disconnected from feelings, disconnected, just mentally immature. That's the problem, not narcissistic tendencies, right? So that's what I'm trying to say in this video. I am not downplaying, you know, the theories of narcissistic tendencies and, you know, having a narcissistic personality disorder. Yes, that is there, but what I'm saying, these behaviors are so common in men, they're so regular and everyday, is that I'm just trying to say we need to look at it for what it really is. And that is like a lack of introspection on their part, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to end this video here, and I'm going to continue to talk about narcissistic traits in a romantic relationship and get into all the other things that I mentioned in the beginning. So stay tuned and be sure to watch part 2, and I'll see you in the next video.